and my fellow panelists who are on the dais and dignitaries here, friends from the colleges across Malleshwaram, I'm told, and others across Bangalore. Welcome to this event, and it's my honor to really be given this opportunity to address all of you. I talk to entrepreneurs, as Prashant said earlier, often, but it's always wonderful to see so many young, especially women, out in the audience, because I really want to see more women get into entrepreneurship, get into startups, get into technology. Yeah, and so, this is really heartwarming. I don't know if it reflects, maybe some of the younger boys have stayed at home, given it's a holiday, but nevertheless, I'm really appreciative of that. So today what I wanted to do was walk you through why it's an awesome time right now to be an entrepreneur in India. Tomorrow morning there'll be a day-long event in Delhi where the Prime Minister will talk about Startup India, Stand Up India, and basically the focus is on encouraging entrepreneurship, nurturing entrepreneurship across India. And not just technology entrepreneurship, all kinds of entrepreneurship, not just big companies, but also small companies that people can create, that you can create. And so I want to walk through this, why right now India is a great time. Can we go to the next slide? This is what everybody's after. In Europe is awesome. Let me tell you why. Next. We all know this. It's actually more than $1 billion. It's 1.3 billion, okay? This is what everybody's after. In Europe, they created the EU, which is the European Union. And guess what they created at most? 350 million maximum. In North America, they created NAFTA. And guess what they created? Maybe 300 million. And that's everybody. In everywhere else in the world outside of China, India is the largest homogeneous population of consumers, of citizens available, single time zone, single country, single set of policies. That's why India is really attractive today from across the globe. And that's why it's going to be an awesome time also for you, because there's going to be that domestic market available to each of you as you start to think about what you do, either as an employee in a company or starting a company yourself, okay? So, next. We're pretty large. Even if you say, you say India, okay, India on a relative basis, you need to adjust because maybe our purchasing power is a little lower than others, but we're fast catching up. And even on an adjusted basis, we're still a very, very large economy. Next. We're growing. Most countries around the world aren't growing. India is actually growing, and that's very significant. India and China, they're two big countries that are growing. Next. This is another area which is untapped. We are great savers, and we have been forever. And actually, a lot of this is going to get unlocked over the next decade because we're becoming fast consumers. And I hope a lot of what we consume, we also make in India. And that's, I think, very important because we don't want to be consuming and importing only, because then I think it will be a deterrent to us. So this is why entrepreneurship across the country here is very important, because we have to make the innovative things that we as Indians want to consume going forward. Next. There's a lot of capital. Prashant is here from Axel. They are one of the big global funds that are active here. They've been building their business over the last decade, and they're very active in supporting many of the innovative companies across our landscape, but there are many others as well. And so India has become a hotbed for investment activities from across the world. And that is great for everyone who's starting out today. I would love to be in your shoes. I first started my first company when I was in college. And I was 19 at that time. And I came back to India when I was 22 to start my first startup here in India. It wasn't even called a startup. Nothing was called a product company even. And it was a very hard environment. I used to send a floppy disk all the way across to BSNL's building to send an email to the US to upload to my bulletin board where I was publishing my software. It was that hard. And there was no regular communications. We would do things by mail, literally, physical mail. Today, it's a vastly different environment for you all, right? It is unbelievably opportunistic. And that's what's beautiful about now. Next. Lots of corporates here. You just have to drive down inner ring road, outer ring road. Look at the brands you have in India. Every time I talk to large global CTOs who drive through Bangalore, and I get to meet a lot of them. Even yesterday I met with 2 global CEOs. And next week the IBM CEO worldwide is here in Bangalore. And every single time what I hear from them is, wow, outside of Silicon Valley, we simply cannot see all these brands. We simply, every time they visit one of the offices that's a resident here, they just go there and they see a single floor with 5,000 people. And there are 10 floors like that in one building, in one office park. And then there are many office parks, one after another. And say that they're impressed, not only by the size and the scale, but now also by the substance and the depth of what we're doing here in India. So that's what's amazing about the opportunity. And this is great because this is a platform you can access to. Next. This is where you all come in. Human talent. This is the one area where we can outdo any country in the world, practically. And guess what? It's the future. If we're going to outdo anybody, all the people who are old now are too old. It's already past. Their time is past in some sense. It is the young that have to deliver. It is you, this generation, that has to deliver for the future. And that's where the opportunity is. And go next. Next, please. So this is the key thing about India. And anytime I speak to people and they say, what is the difference between India and China? India is actually larger than China if you take youth as the big dimension, as the big metric. We are the largest, youngest country in the world by a long shot. And that's a double-sided sword in some sense. You have to satisfy that youth as it grows up. That youth is going to generate massive population growth. It's going to be audacious in its demands. But it's also a huge point of advantage if we can do it, if we can leverage that resource right, if we can channel those talents, and if we can nurture that segment. So that's what is the opportunity going forward. Next. And lastly, I know, even 5 years ago, it was very hard to get parents to say, yes, if you said, I'm going to go do a startup. They would say, why don't you go get a brand? Why don't you go work for a safe company? How will we get you married? All of that would come up. This is all gone now. It's gone to a large extent. I wouldn't say 100% gone. I'm sure some of you might still face some resistance, but there's lots of evidence that it's actually beneficial in being in a startup, that actually it will help your career. You will actually learn faster in many cases. So I'm just giving you some ammunition to use when you go out there and you try to make a pitch for, I want to go work in a startup, or I want to go build a startup. It's actually, the stigma is gone. The risk is high. Nevertheless, I always say, take entrepreneurship very carefully. You might dream about being an entrepreneur. You may even want to do entrepreneurial things in whatever you're doing. You need not necessarily be an entrepreneur. But that mindset is very important. And I think, you get a little bit of that by either working for a startup or being very entrepreneurial in whatever job you're doing in your life too, right? So, very important. We've got lots of good role models now. We've seen a lot of people who've succeeded. We've even seen people who failed and for whom there haven't been negative repercussions and who've been given a second chance now. We will see many, many more of those in the next 5 years, I guarantee you, over the next 5 years. Next. So now, this just sets up why India is good. And this is all, you knew all this, I'm sure. So now let's talk about what are the 4 or 5 inflection points we're seeing across the landscape. And some of my inflection points here will be more tech-centric, but they're enablers for what's going on across the world and why it's a great time again to be building something new. First is a very common one. Next. So this word you'll hear a lot, VUCA. And what does it mean? It means the world is going to be full of these 4 big verbs that you see here. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity and ambiguity. What does that mean? There is no 30-year job anymore in the world. Okay? In fact, there's no chance you'll be in the same job for more than 5 years, I'll guarantee you. In fact, we're going to find more often people will be in multiple jobs concurrently. That's going to be the new norm going forward. In that kind of world, it is very hard to predict what the future will be. But at the same time, you have to be responsible for your path, right? You have to make some decisions based on data. And for somebody who wants certainty, that is, if I do this, this will happen. If I do this, this will happen. It's not going to be that easy to make decisions anymore. And guess what? This is true for even the biggest corporate chieftains out there now. They are also as confused about the world going forward. It's not just any individual person. Most companies cannot decide everything perfectly, regardless of how much money they have in the bank, because the uncertainty is tremendous going forward. And that's the world we live in. So let me tell you another flip side to this. Keep going. So there was a time we dreamt about something, and the amount of time it took to become a reality was X. Guess what that X was at the turn of the last century? Man dreamt to go on the moon, to land on the moon, let's say. And if you just dreamt about it, before it became a reality, it took 70, 75 years. Okay? Today, it's actually almost at the point of flipping. So if you can just next. So what we are seeing today is, there's stuff you can do that it almost feels dreamlike. You can print bone and skin. You can 3D print those. And that's kind of crazy. I mean, soon maybe you'll be able to walk into a store and buy parts for the body, right? And that will be radical. We're starting to see things that will happen with drones that are unbelievable, that you could not think about. Orchestrated drones flying around the city, right? There are things in robotics, there are things in DNA that are unbelievable when you actually look at what's possible. There's stuff that you can do in computation that was impossible to do earlier. In my first job as a researcher at the University of Pennsylvania, I built a computer that was 64, in a project that was run by my professor, that was 64 processors. And it was Motorola 6800s. Today, my smartphone has more capacity than that supercomputer we built that was in a huge hall. And it was taking up power that was, we had to guarantee power to that unit. And it was just a massive machine. And today, my smartphone has more gigaflops. Literally. It has more 3D rendering capability. That's what we were trying to build then. And so that's the the unbelievable state we're in today, which is we can't even imagine what will be possible 10 years from now. In fact, when somebody starts to predict things, I now just pinch myself and say, believe it, because it's probably likely. Because it's so crazy what can happen, how much acceleration we'll see in the next 10 years, right? Next. So the first big transition we're seeing, and there are 5 big transitions I'm listing, other people will list other transitions, but cloud is huge. Now, why is this an important aspect? Why are transitions important? Because when you're building young businesses, points of transition are where you can jump in as a young entrepreneur. It's when somebody is willing to take on something new. So right now, lots of businesses around the world, lots of consumers around the world have actually most of the consumers have already transitioned to the cloud. Thanks to Gmail, thanks to Yahoo Mail, thanks to all the other things that you have online, the Dropboxes and all of that of the world, right? We are also seeing businesses do exactly what consumers did, which is transition into the cloud. And at that point, you have all kinds of things. First, where the stuff runs is changing. So it's changing. Your laptop today, guess what? It's going to be gone. 5 years from now, there'll be no laptops. I guarantee you. Now it may be that obviously even today we still have desktops, right? So in that sense, there'll be laptops, but you won't be going there and by default wanting to buy a laptop from a store. How many of you went last and tried to shop for a desktop? Now, some of you may still do that because you need some power and things like that because the price points haven't yet hit here. But I guarantee you 5 years, certainly 10 years from now, the kind of computing you have will be mostly running in the cloud. It will be some kind of a small surface on which you interact. It may be gesture. It may be controlled primarily from your smartphone. Your auth may be just your iris. You just point your eyes at the device and it starts up. And whatever that device needs, it gets from the cloud instantly. So it's your apps, your personality, everything on that device. And guess what? I guarantee you 15, 20 years from now, those devices, if they're not already fixed into your head or in your glasses or something, are just going to be lying around for anybody to pick up and just use or touch. It'll be on the back of your aircraft seat. It'll be in the car. It'll be on the bus. It'll be in the offices. You won't carry around devices like we do today. It will look as foreign. I remember the day my dad, when I was younger in Bangalore, they had some 6 cell phones. And then he got one of the first cell phones because for some reason his company got one. And he brought it home and showed it to us. It was a big clunking thing, right? Bigger than a brick. And, and there was nobody else to call other than the other 5 cell phone people, okay? Because they hadn't connected it to the PSTN yet. And so for 1 week, they just called each other and just to see if this is working. And, that was a big device. And today we have unbelievable devices. Same thing's going to happen because of cloud when you see the disappearance of even devices. Let's go next. So this is obviously patently obvious to all of us. Always on, always self-serve, instantly usable. When was the last time any of you read a manual for a mobile app? Almost never. How do you use it? You just download it, you start clicking, and you start using it, right? That's the experience that's going to be there everywhere. So every piece of computing is going to be like that. And it's going to be instantaneous. It's going to be available always. And, self-serve. And very low cost. Almost always free. Always connected to your cloud. So these are the 2 big transitions. In India, we just crossed 1 billion mobile connections. Not 1 billion smartphone connections. We're at about 150 million smartphone connections. Growing at about 5 million, 10 million a month. Based on what data you take. Is this good? Yeah. Next. So this is the fastest growth we've ever seen. It's the lowest cost point. India is driving the cost point on smartphones down. Every time I speak to some of the manufacturers, they say it's going to go further and further down to the point where actually some of the platform players will actually give away phones. They'll actually give away phones. You'll be able to walk into a store, just pick up a phone for free because it's so ubiquitous. It's just available because it comes preloaded with various things. And it's the most democratized. Every one of us can talk to everybody. My newspaper guy has a phone. So what do? He doesn't want to come and knock and say, do you have old newspapers? I just give him a missed call and he knows there's newspapers. We leave it outside. He comes and picks it up. That's it. And so just imagine, that's like the lowest, smallest. I was trying to see what is the smallest transaction I do that is almost meaningless to me in some sense, other than I want to recycle. This is the one, which I'm just trying to get rid of this paper, but I'm trying to get rid of it in a responsible way. But this is one unpredictable thing, right? And, in the past, every time he came, we weren't at home. Every time we weren't at home, he would come, whatever, ... This time, now it's perfect. I just give him a call and he comes. And it's just a missed call. That's because we were connected now. And that's happening across the board for everything, every single service. Next. This is a third big thing. I think, some of you may touch this. You may be math majors. You may be doing statistics. You may be doing BCom in economics. You may be, mathematically inclined. This is going to be an amazing area is data analytics. Understanding data. Understanding trends. Understanding what the patterns are. Some people call it data analytics. Some people will go into an area called machine learning. They're not all the same, but they're all related to each other, which is how do I take data that I'm getting from many streams and infer something useful from it and take actions. That's a huge area. We have just touched the tip of the iceberg. India has some of the best companies in that space right now, but there's a long way to go. In fact, one of the Axel companies, Mu Sigma, is doing great work in that area. Where they're serving some of the largest companies around the world in data analytics. And how do you visualize the data? The biggest problem we have now is there's so much data. Even if you were to give me another table of data that told me this is all the interesting points, I can't even analyze that. I can't. It has to be consumable. It has to be consumable by a human being finally if you're going to make judgment. Or it has to be consumable by another machine, but finally somebody will have to program that machine with judgment. So that's where the trick is how do you make some sense of the data, make it fast, because some of these decisions have to be made near real time. Let me tell you a story. I met somebody from one of the large stock exchanges in New York, and they came into Bangalore and they were just talking to, I happened to be at this dinner, and he's the person responsible for that data exchange. And there are two exchanges in New York. There's the NASDAQ and there's the NYSE. NYSE is in Manhattan. NASDAQ has a data center in something called Hoboken, which is across the river. And in Hoboken, there's one data center where all the big investment companies have their servers. And it's called high-speed trading. And these servers, these companies are all fighting to get closer and closer to the NASDAQ rack. There's one set of machines where the NASDAQ servers are. And they're trying to get closer and closer because it's actually come down to how fast can you move your electrons back and forth? How fast can you get your trade in? How fast can you quickly compute what you want to do and execute? Faster than your competitor. So this is the most expensive data center in the world, apparently, for putting a server in. Because everybody wants to get closer and closer to the epicenter, in some sense, right? It's that far, and that's the kind of thing where they're looking for somebody who can come in and tweak one algorithm a little bit so they can go a few milliseconds faster. And that's the kind of opportunity there is out there for even people who are just statistically. You don't have to know computing so much as you have to have some mathematical brilliance there, right? The other thing is IoT. And this may be new here in India. By IoT is the Internet of Things. And you'd have heard a lot of this. And most of us hear about it in the context of consumer, which is wearables, Apple Watch, it's like Fitbit, it's some device that you attach to your phone, it may be something on your TV, it may be something in the house for home automation. But guess what? The huge opportunity in India is going to be, actually in my mind, is industrial IoT. It's going to be IoT in our smart cities. It's going to be, because I'll tell you why. Look around India. It's a land of opportunity. Resources are being misused, wasted in some sense, are leaking, are being pilfered, or are just being mismanaged or inadvertently leaking. And it's our resources. It's either your company's resources or the government's resources that are going. By the government's, it's the people's resources that are being leaking away. And this is where we can put IoT to great use, which is there are small sensors that are being developed. There are sensors for all kinds of things that were unimaginable even 5 years ago. There's a sensor that can tell you who is here in this room because they can do facial recognition. It can tell you the temperature. It can tell you the weight of something. It can tell you what movement is happening. There's all kinds of sensors. And beautiful use cases for use of those sensors are being put together. And this combined with wireless technology and ways to kind of compress the power usage are creating massive numbers of opportunities. There's even a company that is harvesting power from the air. There's basically power in the air. And if the right set of devices, you can actually put something on the wall that's not connected to your regular power, and it can generate power forever. There are companies building those kinds of devices. So you got to just think through some of those opportunities. I think these are all coming in your landscape. And they're all coming over the next 10 years. These are the kinds of opportunities that are happening in IoT. It's just a tsunami of devices, tsunami of data, and it's going to need lots of intelligence to make good use of this. Next. Guess what? We live in a flat world. There's this famous book written by Thomas Friedman where he said the world is flat, but he was actually talking about it in the context of talent, of people, of services, of having to compete in a flat world. I talk about it in the context of opportunities for young entrepreneurs. The world has never been flatter. There's a company in Bangalore, my good friend Rohit Bhatt, who runs this company called RoboSoft. They're actually in Udupi. And he has engineers building mobile apps. And he has more mobile apps that have been in the Apple top 10 list than any other company in India. He's just doing very well. And, they're just sitting there in Udupi. And in fact, when he first started, they'd not even traveled much around the world. They were able to do this. Why? Because of two things. One is there's an app store now. So there's a way for him to distribute from Udupi to every part of the world. He sells in more than 100 countries. He collects in more than 100 currencies. And that's only possible because of those app stores. It's highly democratic. Now, it's very hard, and my next slide will probably tell you why it's hard to win here. But let me tell you why it's awesome. Because you can distribute, you can get discovered, and you can monetize. Every one of you uses the App Store. It's instantly available to everybody, right? If you're an app developer. Next. Next, please. Next. So launching is cheap. It's very cheap to launch a mobile app, and many of you all might do it. And please go ahead and try. Next. The competition is everywhere. So go to the App Store and type anything. Note-taking, contacts, do something for, gaming of any kind. And for every single thing, there's like 20 apps, 50 apps, 100 apps. So it's hard to get discovered, right? Very different.